Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Up B2B. I'm your host, Ed Delia. I'm the second generation president of Delia Associates, the place where family B2B brands go to grow. Today's guest brings a perspective we haven't explored yet on the show, the intersection of physical security, infrastructure, and business continuity. I'm joined by Elisa Mula, founder and president of EM Designs. Elisa founded EM Designs with a vision of building a consulting firm dedicated to the physical security space, working with organizations to design and implement systems that protect people, assets, and critical infrastructure. Her work touches museums and transit systems to K-12 schools, hospitals, and even houses of worship. Ultimately, she and her team at EM Designs are helping organizations recognize, evaluate, and remediate threats before they become incidents. Alongside her consulting work, Elisa has also helped clients secure tens of millions of dollars in government grants to fund security technology, and she leads a nonprofit initiative called Moms in Security Global Outreach, focused on protecting children from trafficking and violence. More recently, her sister Lonnie has joined the firm as customer success role, bringing another family dimension into the business. Elisa's story is about entrepreneurship, building credibility in a highly technical B2B field, and recognizing that security is not just a technical issue, it's a leadership and operational issue. Elisa, welcome to Growing Up B2B.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you today. So let's start with EM Designs. What problem in the security industry did you see that made you decide to start your own firm?
So I really started the firm more just because I knew there was some sort of problem to solve. I just didn't know what it was at the time. And as I sort of made my way through several different iterations and a lot of trial and error, it was almost like the light bulb went off. It was a problem that I knew existed. It just never connected the dots until all of a sudden, COVID hit, and all of these customers that were trying to apply for government funding now didn't have the same ability to go through the normal channels to apply. And they were calling my team because they knew we had done it previously successfully.
Mm-hmm.
So during that period, we really had to sort of like stretch ourselves and figure out how are we going to help them during a time when we can't even get into the building, right? Because all of the schools were shut down, all of the houses of worship, you couldn't get in during COVID. So that's how the program that we have now, that we're probably most known for, that's how that morphed into what we have today. So I technically started the firm first and then all of a sudden discovered we had this special skill set that was highly desirable in the industry.
Cool. It's an interesting look back, that what we call the COVID era, because it did so many things. Obviously, it was a very hard and very sad period for so many. Although I think it also forced a lot in business, and namely a lot of the family businesses to rally.
Yeah.
And to do things they hadn't done before and try things they hadn't tried before and learn new skills and do new things and figure out a way through, which is a testament to the resiliency, I think, of the family governed businesses. There's that tenacity that we'll find a way through.
For sure.
And it sounds like you did likewise.
Yeah.
Excellent. So in the space of physical security, it's something that I'm going to hazard to say a lot of organizations don't think about until something goes really bad or something goes wrong. How do you help leaders start to think about security in a more proactive manner?
Well, we do a lot of litigation support at our firm. And when we're speaking to a customer, whether they're just pure design consulting, they're coming to us, it's a commercial institution, they're coming to us to either write spec for them or make recommendations on different technologies that they should implement. Or if it's a grant customer who, is more in that school or house of worship or hospital space, and they're basically coming to us with an idea of what they need, but they don't have the funding. In any of those scenarios, we're giving them the perspective of what is going to be most defensible. So sometimes we'll hear from a customer, well, if you do the assessment and you give it to me, now I've been notified of what our deficiencies are, and now we're held liable. And that's sort of the wrong way of looking at it. It's almost like they're purposely closing their eyes to what their own problems are, and often they already know what their problems are. But they don't want to document it because now there's a record of it. And so if they kind of feel like if there's no record, then they're not liable. That is simply not the case. And we try and give them that perspective of putting a proactive strategy in place that is defensible so that if and when an emergency happens and you do have to defend your actions and your decisions, you have some sort of starting point. You can actually say, like, yes, we were well aware that there was an issue and we were making strides to rectify or mitigate any potential threats based on, the following documentation. Simply not having the documentation does not make you any less liable. So that's one of the things that we try to communicate to leaders, to start thinking more proactively and being defensible is my new favorite word, defensible in court.
Wow, that's really an unexpected answer because I would have thought that in many ways you're raising vulnerabilities that they just didn't occur to them, but on the contrary, it's occurred to them. They just don't want to acknowledge
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, and that the thing is, it's, well, there's nothing we can do about it. They almost have like a little bit of a defeatist mentality. Like, we don't have
Mm,
a budget. There's nothing we can do about it. There's always something you can do about it. Even if you
mm,
put together a training program to say, hey, this is a potential vulnerability for our institution. We're aware of it. We need the team, and that's everybody, right? Because you've heard the term security is everybody's job. Everybody on the team has to be aware of this potential issue so we can rally around and try and prevent an emergency. Even just that is at least a step in the right direction.
mm.
So,
And is that something that your firm would support,
yeah,
the
yeah.
foundational training?
In many cases, we are either connecting them with and recommending a trainer that's specific for their area,
Mm,
or we're giving them actionable items from a policy and procedure protocol standpoint, and a documentation standpoint. One of the other phrases we hear over and over is if it gets measured, it gets done, right? So
sure.
if there's a new policy for the company where we have to do things in a different way, and we're going to be monitoring you to make sure that you are complying with this new rule, that's when you actually see it get done. And if
Mhm,
it doesn't get done, if the team is having trouble adopting it, you can address it. How do we make it
mhm,
easier for you to check this box and make sure you're following the rules? But again, just sort of closing your eyes to what the issue is, that's not something you could show those measurable outcomes by documenting. We're trying to get people to adopt a new way of keeping us all safe, keeping our data safe, all of our assets safe.
mm,
But by not documenting and not doing all of those things, you have no defense in court.
mm. Well said. Well
Yeah,
said. A lot to think about.
it is.
Um, So a lot of your work focuses on, I guess, environments that would be construed as potential targets: airports, schools, museums, and also public infrastructure.
Yeah.
Um, Without going too deep and offering up what we'll call industry secrets, let's say, what are some of the more common vulnerabilities that some of these organizations may not have considered?
So we have actually a large security conference coming up called ISC West, and that's out in Vegas every year. My team will be going out there. And what you're going to see at a conference like that is some of the most incredible cutting edge technology. And so when we start working with institutions that have the funding to implement these technologies, it's almost never the tech that is the issue. So people, when and I, have been asked a question similar to that, like, well, we can't protect ourselves properly because we don't have the right technology. That is not true. Simply not true. The things that tend to get overlooked the most is not the technology. It's usually the lack of training, policy procedure, and maintenance, right? So if there's a security leader in place, how is that security leader trying to implement change within the institution? Um, Great example for this, and I'm sure the audience has heard this already, but with one of the most notable school shootings, the Uvalde shooting, they all they talked about was how a door was propped open. It was a secondary entryway. It wasn't the main entryway. So everybody,
Mhm.
was focused on that main entrance because there was most likely a lot of technology that was looking
Yeah.
at how people were coming in and out of the building. But a secondary entryway that got propped open, and from what I understand, got propped open repeatedly. It wasn't the first time. That tended to be overlooked, and that most definitely was not protocol. So
Mm.
when you look back and you say, well, how many times was that door open, propped open? Did anyone address the issue, why it was being propped open? Did they correct the issue? Did they put some sort of alternative option for people who needed to access that door in place, or at least address it with them from a training perspective, saying like, you can't do this because that's what I see more of, or my team sees more of, are these sort of ancillary, you know,
Mm.
items that are off on the edges that tend to get overlooked because we're so excited to implement this shiny new technology. So all of those other, you know, less sexy versions of here's what we need to do to keep our community safe, those sort of get brushed off to the side. So those are the things we tend to see get overlooked.
And
And I'm sorry, an over reliance on technology. People say, well, we put the latest and greatest tech in here. How did this happen? Because you're relying simply on the tech and not looking at the human element
mm,
that has to interact with that technology.
yeah, I think it's a great message. It's technology gets you so far that it's the leader driving it and driving the change as well as the underlying, as your firm provides, the design and strategy around it that enables it and makes it work the way it's supposed to. And I've seen firsthand, without naming names, I'll just say a certain environment where there was plenty of upfront, get through the front door security
Yes.
during the facility. They had a bay door in the back and it was wide open. And I asked casually, "Is that door always open?" "Oh, well, it's kind of warm in here, so the guys wanted to open it." "Oh, okay." You
Right.
could run a truck through this back door.
Right.
So I think it kind of belittles the upfront security that I had to go through to get through the front door. I could have
Totally.
just walked around the back.
But even that could be, supplemented if they did need to keep the door open. The doors are there for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So if there was a large delivery coming through, or, you know, somebody needed to move a lot of boxes in and out of that space, there are things that you can do from a basic, simple,
Mm,
safety protocol measure. If you need to keep the door open for a period of time, then add a security guard in that space,
yeah. Yeah.
or make sure you have, if it's delivery that's coming in, make sure you have the appropriate people there to receive the delivery instead of just letting people walk into your space. There's a lot of things that you can do that are not tech related
Mm,
to accommodate. But again, it's just putting in the time and effort to think through those scenarios and give people alternate options to say this is the safer way of doing this.
mm. Good point. So when you walk into a facility for the first time, with your trained eye and lens for this, what do you look for that gives you an indication that leadership of that said facility is taking security seriously or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this actually goes back to when I first started doing assessments for grants. This is one of the things I learned in my grad program when I first started doing grants. The first thing you want to see from the outside of the building. If you're looking at the building, if you're taking notes, you're taking pictures, somebody should spot you, especially if it's in the middle of the day, right? If it's late at night and there's not too many people around, it's a different story. But if it's in the middle of the day during operational hours
Hmm.
and you are actively observing, we call it hostile surveillance, you're actively observing the ongoings in and around that building. If somebody doesn't come up to you and say, "Hey, can I help you?" or "Is there somebody here you're looking for?" or whatever it is, just to engage you, to
Hmm.
acknowledge we see you and we see what you're doing, and you may be on private property, you may, not
Hmm.
necessarily be welcomed here, and we're watching. That's enough. And that's more of a company culture, right? So the idea that security is everybody's job, it's, a little cliche, but it really is true. There are
Hmm.
certain buildings that, and I usually find this to be true with buildings that have less technology than more technology because of that over reliance, that set it and forget it mentality. But when we come across, let's just say a small school, a nonprofit school that they already don't have a ton of technology, but they do have people and leadership that care and want to keep their congregants safe, their, students safe, they will take the time and effort to train faculty and staff members to say, if you see something, say something, and here's how you do it, and give them those instructions and have somebody to report back to.
Hmm.
We have one customer that they're up against a property that's, I believe, owned by the town, and it's almost like marshland. And two times there were drones, being flown over like the playground area that's up against that marshland. And so right away, the faculty got all the kids inside, alerted the principal of the school, and the principal called the police saying, like, hey, we don't know where this drone came from, but we know it's hovering over our playground, and we want to make sure that, we're not being exposed in any way. Well, it turns out they did find out where it was coming from, but that was the right thing to do. That's somebody who takes the
Hmm.
safety and security of their community seriously. This was something out of the blue. There was no real technology they had in place to offset that, but it was
Hmm.
merely them knowing how to react, protecting their students, and then making a phone call to local law enforcement. It was as simple as that, but it
Hmm.
could have been a lot worse, particularly when you see what's going on with a lot of
Certainly.
schools and houses of worship across the country.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And that's what I guess your earlier point surprised me with and it's hard to say. Perhaps these things have always happened, and it's just because of our immediate exposure and access to news, real time, that it's become more visible. Uh,
Yeah,
but you would think that people would not want to put their head in the sand when it comes to security, especially if they're dealing with some form of critical infrastructure or sensitive matter on their facility grounds.
yeah,
But that's why you're here, to remind them that they should.
yes, exactly.
So, you've got a very interesting background. It spans from manufactured products to integration, consulting, academic training, and protection management, among others. How does that body of experiences shape how you now look at and approach security strategy as a whole?
Yeah, I didn't really think about that until just recently. Not too many people in our industry have that sort of wide breadth across the entire
Sure,
industry.
sure.
Um, so being able to sort of see like the real world application, how it gets translated, whatever the need is, how it gets translated up through the vendor, the integrator. And then from there, it moves up to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer is now trying to solve this problem for the client, right? And they're looking from their lens of, we are problem solver. We're taking, complex situations and writing software for it, or creating a device that you can implement to solve that problem. but they're doing it in this sort of like translated way. Very rarely is a manufacturer going on site to many different um, end user facilities to really sort of see how the product is engaging in real life. They're
Hmm.
sort of leaning on their vendors to do that. The vendors implement the technology and they're reporting back to the manufacturer, well, this wasn't working correctly, or the camera wasn't focusing, or we weren't collecting the data in the way that we had hoped, or the way it was demoed wasn't how it actually, was functioning in the space. So being able to see that whole sort of ecosystem evolve,
Hmm.
I think really helped me.
Hmm.
And then when I went back to school for it, I always say one of the best classes that I ever had was more of a, overall, we would call it like a generalist class, like that overall security consulting perspective, where
Hmm.
we are studying security and how it gets implemented and what's practical, what's not. You can have like the best security in the world or the best technology in the world, but if it's not easily implementable, it's not going to get used properly. So to be able to study that from all the different angles, I think helped me do what we're doing right now and put things in place with our team so that we're giving that perspective to the end user and coordinating with the integrators and the manufacturers as best as we possibly can in a way that they can't necessarily always do for themselves because they're sort of stuck in their silo.
Hmm.
Um, and that's why I partner with organizations like Zero Now or NCSSD, which is the National Council for School Safety Directors,
Hmm.
the PASS organization, Partner Alliance for School Safety. Um, because they're the ones that are really from the academic standpoint evaluating the technologies and how they get used in real life scenarios. And that's where you see, I think, the biggest impact, from the security industry down to these real life end users.
And I think you framed it well, real world impact. So I think, what it sounds like you bring to the table is, not just a solution, but a pragmatic, useful, doable, repeatable solution that's actually
Yeah,
going to get applied with consistency and continuity, driven from leadership down, to make it stick. And it's not always the name on the box; it's how the name on the box is used and
that's
utilized
it.
as an ecosystem that makes it and enables it and helps it do great things.
That's right.
So, getting back to a point you made before, you've been become known for helping clients secure funding to invest in security technology. And I think if I got the data point right, last year you helped clients secure over 20 million in grants, and you're expecting to potentially even double that soon.
Yes.
That sounds pretty significant. Talk from what does that level of funding actually translate into in real world protection? What does that enable them to do?
Well, so that's a great question. When we look at, it was actually in 2024, we calculated over 20 million in funding that we got awarded through our program. We think 2025 is going to be more than double that. We just don't know yet because the results aren't out. Um, but what we're seeing now out of that 20 million, we're watching it get spent on all sorts of areas of security, not just technology, guard services, trainings, planning, right? So that whole
Mhm.
policy and procedure aspect. But the most impact on the industry, and this is where the large majority of the money sort of goes to, is that sort of foundational technology, the video
Mhm.
and the access control. That's always number one and number two. Number three in that mix is ballistic glass film. And I think it's partly because of the demographic we're targeting, although I actually just met with one of our vendors this morning, and he was saying how much the cities now are implementing glass film on some of the skyscrapers. You would never see this years ago, but because recent events in New York City where Somebody was just walking down Park Avenue and decided they were going to, blast through all of the glass in the main lobby of this giant skyscraper. I can't remember the weapon that they used, but they did. They shot out all of the glass. There were a few other incidences where we were hearing about bomb scares and all sorts of stuff. So these major cities are starting to catch wind that, like, hey, we might be in trouble if we don't reinforce our glass.
Mm.
And so that's the third thing that we're seeing a lot of this money get spent on, or get invested in their safety programs with grant funding.
That's really interesting, and I think it also speaks to the vantage point you have through EM Designs. Is it's not just the tech, right?
Yeah.
It's also the physical infrastructure too, as well as so it's bringing all these pieces together. That's really interesting about how
Yeah.
you're able to operate really autonomously from all of it, but then being able to bring it together in a cohesive manner.
Yeah.
Um, so if a property owner or a business owner listening today, and maybe they're working on some mission critical components or doing some testing or research or something where they would require a secure environment or a heightened secure environment. If they were to say, well, we as an organization are too small to worry about physical security, what might you say to them?
So again, just going back to the idea of having that sort of defeatist mentality, like we don't have the funds, or
Okay.
we're too small, nobody's coming after us, or um, we're working remotely, so we don't even have a physical footprint. What about cybersecurity? Every organization, if you are in business, you have assets to protect. Those assets may be people, it may be intellectual property, it may be client data. So just because you don't even have a physical structure, a lot of people are working remote anyway,
Mm,
you still have data to protect. And again, if that data gets exposed, how liable are you?
mm,
And the idea that anyone is saying, we're too small, or we don't have enough money, or we don't have the capabilities. At this point in time, that's not, again, a defensible answer. If
mm,
if we were, that's why there's things like cybersecurity insurance. If you have data that could be compromised, or any asset that could be compromised, and you don't have some sort of plan in place to say, all right, this year we're going to focus on being more secure in this way. Next year, maybe we'll have the funding to implement some level of technology. If you don't have that plan in place and an emergency happens, you're going to be hard pressed to come up with an answer as to why. There will be an attorney on the other end, and they're going to grill you as to what was your safety measure, what was your protocol in handling what you handled, why did you do it that way? And you're going to have
mm,
to answer that question. So if a business owner says to me, like, no, we can't do it, even if it's not a small business, we've spoken to a number of very large businesses,
mm,
and the security directors have said, my senior leadership won't let me spend money on a new security operations center. And we will tell them, well, we're going to give you the argument as to why you're now going to be held liable, or they'll be held liable, just so you know, um, things that you can implement without the funding.
mm,
And that's stuff that we've been doing more and more lately. Again, that whole litigation support perspective, uh, puts it in front and center in their mind. If I'm a security director, I don't want to be held liable. If I'm going to be the one who's on the hot seat getting deposed if an emergency event happens, I want to at least be able to say, look, I did my homework. I presented, what we
mhm,
needed to do, and we didn't have the money. And that was as far as I could take it. Well, you have to at least, have something documented and on the record.
mm.
So,
And to your point earlier, having even just some basic training, some basic protocols. If somebody unwanted is in a facility, um, what's the plan of action? What do you do? You know,
And and that stuff, the whole sort of positioning is stuff that we do for free for our customers. Most people don't realize that. They'll talk to us and say, "Well, we don't even have the money for you to come in and do a full assessment." That's okay. We could do a very high level assessment so that you can position what you feel you need for your organization, for you to do your job as a
Mhm.
safety and security director, so that you can position it and present it to your senior leadership. And that covers you from liability. So we'll talk to security directors all day long and provide them with full detailed reports on why this is important, why they need attention to this aspect of the business for their
Mhm.
senior leaders. So for anybody who, wants to dig into that, we do that for free.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And the work that you do is just, from an outside perspective, is who doesn't live in the world you live in is quite honestly is fascinating. And I think we could probably spend 4 hours today talking about just what you do.
Right.
But in the interest of our show, we do want to bring it back around to the family business connection. So I did want to bring up a relatively, but not super recent development. Your sister
Yes.
recently joined the company in a customer success role.
She did.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. What made the timing right to bring a family member into the business?
So we definitely had a lot of growth over the last 4 years. We've either doubled or tripled our business over the last 4 years, which is huge. So there was definitely a lot of growing pains. We added a bunch of people to the team. Um, but the piece that we kept trying to come back to was this idea of, sort of a dedicated customer service person.
Hmm.
Because a lot of what we do with our customers, particularly on the grant side, there's a ton of an emotional investment from our clients. They're deeply involved in the process. They care about getting this money. Um, these are the customers because they have to fight for the funds that truly have like skin in the game in
Mm.
this project. With some of our more corporate customers or larger commercial customers, they already have a budget. They're just sort of like, okay, we got to get this done. Let's just move it along. They're a little bit detached from it, but
Mm.
the grant customers, their heart and soul gets poured into these projects. And so we don't take that lightly. I mean, we actually get emotionally invested in some of these grants when we lose a grant, and particularly when we know that this was a customer that desperately needed the money. We do everything we can to help that customer, whether it's a donation of some sort, or we reach out to the grant representatives and sort of badger them until they give us some sort of direction or answer so we can now reapply.
Hmm.
So we take that effort very, very seriously. And we needed someone who was like fully dedicated to the end user from that
Hmm.
customer service standpoint. And we tried it a couple different ways with different people on the team, but it just was not clicking because they were so hyper focused on their task at hand.
Hmm.
We have a team that's fully dedicated to the application, the writing, the research, the very much academic sort of
Hmm.
procedure of what we
Yep.
do on the grant side. Then we have someone who's focused on spending all of that money, $20 million in funding. Well, somebody's got to help you spend it, and we're helping them spend it. So that's a different aspect. But when it comes to, that customer who's like, what do we do now? Like we did everything we could. We spend so much time and effort on this. Like, what's the next step? We don't
Hmm.
ever want to turn those people away. We're going to try and keep helping them as much as we can. And that's where that dedicated person, we just needed them to sort of focus and hone in. And that's what she had. I mean, her whole career has been in service of clients. Whether
Mm.
she was, started out as a business owner earlier in her career. and he ran a very successful business and then took some time off, to raise children. And then when she came back to it, she was working for other business owners, always in that capacity of interacting with the clients, the
Mm.
everyday people who are coming for help or services or whatever. And there's a part of her personality that she's just made for that type of role. Very gregarious, very warm, comforting, can speak to people in a way where, sometimes when we put on our technical hats and we're speaking to them from this very engineering level, technical level, goes right over their head. They sort of glaze over. She is translating a lot of that information in a way that is easily digestible for our clients. They don't want to hear the ones and zeros. They want to hear, like, tell me how you're going to help me get to that next step. And that's just what she is excellent at. And I think she's been with us, Lonnie's been with us now for almost a year, and the impact has been tremendous for us.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. And I could tell you really kind of lean into her strengths. And um, to what extent does she does she bring about some balance to you or compliment to you as the leader of the organization? She obviously has great service and people skills, but one might argue so do you.
Uh, she's got me beat in that area. She's definitely everyone I've spoken to thus far, and most people don't realize that she's my sister or related to me in any way, and they'll just call me and be like, "Oh, she's fantastic. Lonnie's great. Here's what happened. Let me tell you what she did with my customer." I think in the beginning, when she was still sort of learning the process, there were definitely some hiccups, and people were almost concerned, like, who's this new person? Are they going to be able to translate information? And, she had to learn. There was a learning
Mhm.
curve just like everybody else. But now she's at the point where a lot of our partners are saying, hey, can you have Lonnie call my customer? Because she just brings this level of sort of just relatability and understanding. She's got me beat there for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And she also brings, as I can tell, a high degree of trust.
for sure.
And that can be huge.
That's
Um, Wanted to touch on something I mentioned in the opening. You founded Moms and Security Global Outreach
Yeah.
that focuses on protecting children from trafficking, from violence. Talk
Yeah.
for a moment, Alyssa, if you would. What inspired that initiative?
Um, so this was before we really started with EMD. I was working for a facial recognition software manufacturer. And most of my career has been in New York City. It's just in the last, we'll say, 5 years or so that we really branched out across the country. But prior to that, I had been working with law enforcement and trying to sell facial recognition to law enforcement. And I came across an article that spoke about how facial recognition was deployed in some of the major cities in India. Um, and they recovered within a month, they recovered something like 2,000 missing children
Wow.
just by implementing facial recognition in the cameras that were already laid out across the city. And so reading this, blew my mind. How are we not doing this in the US? And so I called up every law enforcement contact I could, basically saying, I have the ability to give you free licenses. If you would just implement it in this way, I will give you all the free licenses you want. And all but one, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say which law enforcement agency accepted it, but it's a big one. All but one said no. And the reason they said no was because they could not accept freebies. They couldn't accept free software. And I said, this is ridiculous. Because of some technicality, there are missing children that you could potentially recover or uh, share information, interagency sharing, and potentially solve some of these missing person cases. And you're not doing that just because of a technicality. And so that's when we opened up Moms in Security. That in combination with a very famous missing persons case, if you're following the issue of child trafficking, just about 10 years ago, there was an American boy that was taken in Haiti, kidnapped in Haiti. And that brought us to the organization that has been looking for him for the last 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, they don't believe that he's uh, deceased. They actually think he's still out there, and they've had some leads even more recently. But in the process of looking for this boy, they've found and rescued countless children, literally all over the world, the same group of people. It's not even so much the organization anymore. It's just this core group of people that we've been working with and supporting, literally all over the world. They work with law enforcement, in
Hmm.
conjunction with law enforcement. And so our organization is set up to do just that. We work
Mhm.
with law enforcement that is specifically looking for exploited children, and we try and get them whatever technology or resources that they need. And we've been doing that for, I think it's about 5 or 6 years now, and
Wow.
pretty successfully. I mean, nobody takes a salary from the organization. All the money is put into the mission, and we've been able to do some incredible trainings. We've gotten retired law enforcement, both federal and state level law enforcement, to interact with each other and train each other. You wouldn't believe how underfunded this particular segment of law enforcement is. So much so that there are third party organizations like NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the law enforcement communities that are looking to rescue these kids have to rely on organizations like that because they are underfunded and under-resourced, and there are so many rules and regulations around what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do
Hmm.
to recover these kids. So we're just trying to do everything we can to help them out.
I mean, just imagine if that technology was turned loose more broadly in this country.
Or if the agencies were able to work in a systematic way and share a lot of that information. I mean, what could be done is tremendous. I'm going to add one thing. There's a gentleman who is retired law enforcement, I should say, and he opened up a nonprofit, and we've communicated and collaborated a little bit on certain projects. He had a very specific skill set on finding uh, missing persons from cold cases. So he literally and he's funded by the Tim Tebow Foundation. His work is absolutely tremendous. His name's Kevin Branzetti, and his organization is Child Protection Task Force, I believe. Um, and so he literally goes from law enforcement department to law enforcement department, state to state, pulling their, we'll say, colder cases and finding leads for, on average, if this stat is still correct, on average 80% of their cold cases he's able to find new leads for.
Oh my goodness.
So it's tremendous. I mean, the fact
Wow.
that the fact that this was a law enforcement guy who had to retire to have more of an impact nationally on law enforcement agencies that are looking for children, that tells you something. We could be doing a lot better.
For sure, for sure. So looking further ahead, as we talk about the physical security industry and the evolution, so evolving technology, you've got the integration of AI, um, and the infrastructure potentially becoming more interconnected, hopefully at the law enforcement level too, but we'll see. As you look further out into the future, so what do you see? How do you see the industry evolving?
I love this question. I just gave a presentation to a whole bunch of security professionals in New Jersey on AI specifically. And while I am not a proponent to AI everything,
Hmm.
um, I am an advocate to learn as much as you can from the security perspective on AI and how to use it responsibly. Um, uh, very well respected security friend of mine had this famous saying, never bring a stick to a gunfight, right?
Mm,
So if all the bad guys are out there now, since the inception of AI, using AI to figure out how to gain access to your facility, gain access to your data, how to plan attacks, how to prey on children, all of these different ways AI is being used in a bad way. If you are a security professional and you don't understand that and you can't use it to your benefit to protect your customers or your assets, then what are you doing? You're bringing a stick to a gunfight, right? We're sort of
mm,
stuck in this old methodology of, from a security standpoint, well, we're consultants and we're just going to tell you exactly what you need to implement. Our consulting firm is completely different. We know we as practitioners are not the be all end all for all types of security. It's not a one size fits all, but we
mhm,
do have a specific skill set, as I said, to translate this information up the chain and back down, right? So we're
mhm,
working with the people, boots on the ground, implementing these systems. We're seeing it in real time at our customer locations, and we're trying to poke holes where we can. Like, what about this? And if this happens, how do we react? And do we need to supplement it? And so, what our methodology is, we call it layered intelligence. So we are the translators, we're the security minded translators that are looking at all the technology that's out there. Some technology that currently implements AI and some that doesn't. Then we're looking at the policy and procedure of it all and how the humans are interacting with all of that. But then we're taking our network of security professionals that are thought leaders, are living and breathing all of this technology and the policies and procedures and the practices in real time, and how are they implementing it. So if, in other words, if you took a hospital security director and you put him in a K through 12 school, is he instinctively going to know what to do to keep that facility and those students secure? Probably not, because he's so focused on the hospital theme, or somebody from a museum, or
mhm,
somebody from, a large corporate financial institution. These are different aspects of how to use security technology in a day-to-day operation. And so, who better to advise us than somebody else or a collection of experts that are living and breathing it all day, every day? And that's what we're doing. We're taking that additional layer of expertise, filtering it through AI, you know, doing iteration and iteration over and over to say, okay, this is the best possible option for you, our customer, in this specific space with this
mhm,
specific need. And so that's where we're utilizing AI
mhm,
responsibly. We're not using all the platforms that you're probably seeing online. We're being very careful as to which platforms are the best in terms of keeping data safe,
mhm.
and then implementing um, our recommendations based on those layers of intelligence.
Yeah,
That makes sense?
it does. It does. Having been fairly immersed in AI in our industry, and having spoken to some that are even more immersed who come from more of a technology space, it definitely resonates. And there are most certainly platforms that are secure and platforms that are very cool and very
Right.
unsecure.
Very user friendly and
Yeah,
deceptively
yeah,
unsecure.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
I was talking to one friend, I go, well, this platform can do, and I won't name the platform, but a variety of functions. He's like, yeah, yeah, but you're totally exposing your network when you
Yeah.
plug it in. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that didn't come up.
Right. Right. Well, and how about just the mere fact of, let's say you have a large organization, or even if you have a small organization, how many of your employees are utilizing those networks, those
Yeah,
platforms, and you have no idea? Are you even
yeah,
training on that?
yeah.
You have firewalls in place. You have trainings in place as to don't use this platform and here's why.
Yeah.
So
We're starting to see that show up even here as governing policies for what is our policy on AI,
right.
right? Is the technology kind of raced ahead of policy, and now the policy needs to catch up and catch up quick.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and any institution that is building an Intel team too, the temptation is there to find information and stay on top of any new Intel by any means necessary. Well, you don't want to cut your nose off to spite your face, right? You don't want to expose yourself
yeah,
so you got to be careful when implementing those Intel teams.
yeah, for sure. Last question. If any of our listeners wanted to connect to learn more about you or more of the work you're doing at EM Designs or your nonprofit, what's the best way for them to reach out?
So I have 3 websites. If you just want to learn about me and my background, it's elisamula.com. If you are interested in our services, whether it's traditional security consulting or grant services, that website is emdnyc.com. And if you want to know more about helping us with the fight against child trafficking and exploitation and how to support law enforcement through that, you can find us at momsinsecurity.com.
Great. Well, security is certainly one of those disciplines that's somewhat invisible when it works and sadly painfully obvious when it fails. Yeah. Elisa's work certainly reminds us that protecting people, infrastructure, and organizations requires both technical expertise and leadership foresight. Elisa, thank you for sharing your perspective and the important work you're doing in the physical security space. Again, we've been speaking with Elisa Mula, founder and president of EM Designs, and I'm your host, Ed Delia, and this has been another episode of Growing Up B2B. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Elisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ed.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning into Growing Up B2B. To explore more episodes and insights, visit podcast.delianet.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice. Having worked with hundreds of family-led businesses across my career, and being a second-generation leader myself, I'm on a mission to help every family business I meet achieve next-level growth for their organization. So feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's support each other. You can also find out more about my company at delianet.com. Again, I'm your host, Ed Delia, and thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.